Hello there, welcome back to my channel. It's James here. I hope you're doing okay. So, today we're going to cut some things up. I have my knife ready. I have two Monstera here that I'm going to cut up for basically opposite reasons. I've had this one in the video before. We're just jumping straight into it, sure. This is a Monstera Aurea, so it's the small form yellow variegated Monstera. This is the top part of my plant that I cut away pretty recently. I would say within the last 2 months, I can't remember exactly. This is the part that I kept. I was intending to grow this and hopefully get some better variegation out of it. And then the lower parts I was rooting, again, to try and get some better variegation, because as you can see, like, it is variegated. Even this new leaf is very lightly variegated there. It's not fully coming through yet because it's a relatively new leaf, but it's not as sort of contrasted and Aurea beautiful like as I would like it to be, if that makes sense. So it's done super well in this little plastic container. Ignore this is a little bicolor cutting that somehow snuck in there and I've just left it. This is like some amazing root growth, as you can see. It's just in a sealed plastic container. Well, not sealed, but doesn't have any drainage holes or anything. And I've just had it in moss rooting away in there, and it's done super well. So that's great. So what I'm going to do with this one is I'm going to cut the top part here, so these two leaves, into one part, and then I'm going to take off this middle node, and that one I'm going to root separately. So this will be the only one I actually kind of separate completely. And the lower two nodes I'm going to leave here, wait for a growth point to appear from both of them, because it's very likely that they'll both start to grow, and then I will cut them away because they're so well rooted in here in this pot at the moment that I don't want to sort of disturb them too much. But I'm pretty confident everything's going to go well. There'll obviously be a little bit of an adaptation period for this top node. I'm not expecting to get a new leaf out of it for a little while, but it's got some decent aerial roots, so hopefully it should root okay. And same with the center part. So that's what I'm going to do with this one. Again, just sort of a bid for more variegation. I'm pretty confident that some of the lower nodes that I took will variegate really well. But it'll be nice to get a little bit more out of this. It might be a disaster. I'll update you on this as we go, as they kind of grow. It might be that none of the shoots coming out of this have good variegation at all, and that's kind of the risk you have to run, but I know that I will maintain at least a small amount with that top cutting, if that makes sense. On the other end of the spectrum, I have this variegated Adansonii. This is kind of the, well, it's the archipelago, but I've seen a lot of people calling it the Monstera Adansonii Ghost. As you can see, these ones, all of these leaves came through just as white as this initially. The ones that are a bit further away from the light, they kind of turn this minty green, and they can photosynthesize, which is nice. There's a little bit of more life in those. But these upper leaves, which are quite close to my grow light, are just getting a little bit too white. So what I'm going to do is, I have a new growth point here. I don't know if you can see there. So it's decided to put out a second growth point here. This one I'm going to leave on. I'm going to give it a better moss pole because this is a shocking one, and I'm going to cut this whole top part into separate nodes. This also may be a disaster. A lot of these leaves, particularly the ones at the top, have no green. Some of them have a decent, well, not a decent, but they have a small amount of chlorophyll in the centers, so they may survive. I'm kind of hoping that as I move these cuttings into lower light, they'll do that same minty things as the lower ones. That would be ideal. But if not, it's very possible that I'll lose some of these. It's not growing how I want it to. This moss pole is literally just a stick with moss around it and another stick, and I want to give it like a proper board or something to climb so I can get some mature foliage. So that's what we're going to do there. That will be a little bit trickier, so we'll get to that in a second. Starting with this Monstera, this is going to be the easy part. Let's just lop off the top. This is a knife that I have sterilized. I put it over a flame and I wash it and everything, and I recommend doing that between plants. I'll probably run and do that in between, but maybe I'll forget. So I'm just going to cut this to the center, nice and simple. It's a pretty thick stem. Careful of your fingers if you are doing this. I feel like I need like full-on secateurs for this, but there we go. Okay. And that is one cutting taken. So that is the top cutting of the Monstera. Decent variegation in this one, a small amount of variegation in there, a couple of secondary fenestrations, but I definitely want to give it a chance to grow a little bit better, and some aerial roots, so that's going to be fine. And I will just stick that somewhere in here. I knew I had something ready. Another one of those little plastic containers, I will stick it in there. Good, so that's one. Again, this central one is the only one that I'm going to fully cut away. I'm just going to take this string that's tying it to the bamboo off, and then this little thrip sachet, which is basically done, I think it's run out, and then I'm going to cut off the center part. So I want to give it as many of these aerial roots as possible, so I'm going to cut below, or just above the node. I don't think there's any likelihood of it rotting because it's such a well-rooted plant, but I do want to give this node that I'm cutting off here as good a chance as possible to grow well. So we can take that out. That's not going to help at all. So these ones are good. This is going to be an absolute nightmare to get them out, but there are a couple of roots like extending down into this pot here. Bear with me. So I'm probably going to have to break a fair bit of these because the whole pot is just so root bound. For those of you who watched my previous video, I spoke a little bit about like how I found using live moss rather than sort of dried sphagnum moss, and it has just been so good. And this is another example of how like amazing, I don't know, something about like the oxygen levels in the moss or something I think is making it just that little bit better for the roots to grow into. And yeah, this is what it's going to have to be. It's just going to have to reroot after this because these roots are not coming out at all. So yeah, those would have been some pretty decent roots, but I just had to kind of pull them out because there's no way I'm going to get this apart. Like, that is just so root bound. So yeah, second cutting. This has 0 variegation on it. There is still a decent amount in the stem, I guess, like some striping. You probably can't see, but hopefully it's a pretty chunky stem as well. Hopefully I get something okay out of that. And yeah, this part, like I said, I'm going to leave. There's absolutely no way that I'm going to try and separate these yet. I will let both of them put out growth points, and if they both do super well, then I may try and separate them afterwards, but it's going to be, I mean, I don't know if you can see, but like that root is like super woody. I mean, I'm going to have to pull the entire thing apart to get that off. So I may end up just leaving these together, but still that's a nice little base plant to grow something else from, and I've got 2 chances at good variegation from that. So yeah, that is the first one cut up, the Monstera Aurea. So we've got this non-variegated one, we've got this top sort of medium variegated one, and we've got the bottom one, which I would say is a little bit more variegated, but yeah, that's nice. And then I've got this little bicolor, which I stupidly snapped off the growth point, but I think there is still a viable node there, so hopefully it will be okay, because we love a bicolor. So I'll stick that back in, and then we will move on to the other one. I'm now going to attack this creature. So yeah, a little bit more complicated. I think what I'm probably going to do is cut off this top part, which is the heavily variegated section up here, just above the moss pole, because then below that I'll have to take the moss pole out and kind of cut stuff apart. So again, bear with me. This probably isn't super interesting, but maybe you're enjoying watching me massacre my plants. Ooh. Okay, so there we go. It's a little bit attached to this stick, but that is our top cut. So super ghosty. I mean, I will separate all of these, and a couple of those, there is some variegation in this, some green in the stem, particularly in the petioles, much less in the actual stem. But like I said, I will separate all of these, and some of them may have a good chance of survival. I'll count how many there are, and then I'll let everyone know when I do an update how many out of those actually survived. So from here I'm going to cut down quite low, all the way to the base of this pole, I think. So to the point where the stem starts to kind of elongate, the internodal space is lengthening out just a little bit because it started to climb. So that's our cut done. And then just get rid of these canes because they're not doing anything helpful. And this moss pole, like I said, is just, it's kind of like how I deal with plants in general. I just sort of give them what they need as we go. I don't have any master plan to begin with. Well, a lot of the time I don't. So this is what we're looking at. This is like a little sort of climbing section attached to this pole, this little moss chunk, which is kind of nice. That could be quite a cool kind of sort of mounted thing, couldn't it? But I'm not going to do that. I'm going to cut it all apart. And the string, like, so when I did my moss wall, I did a little update. The moss wall that I showed in my previous video, that was one of the ones that the first one that I did, and I used string to kind of tie it together. And a couple of people were asking what I used to tie the halves together, and like, I definitely would not recommend using string. I used string here just to bind some of this moss onto the moss pole, and after a few months in the grow tent getting wet, dry, wet, dry, wet, dry, being exposed to the bright grow lights and stuff, they just kind of crumble apart. So definitely go for something a little bit more stable, some wire or some zip ties or something like that. Yeah, even for your moss poles. Okay, so that is our little thing. I'm going to chop this up into, let's see how many cuttings we can get out of this. So this lower part I'm going to leave exactly as it is. I'm going to make a moss pole for this separately. Just thinking, do I cut a little bit lower? Because these leaves are much more likely to survive. It's not. I'm taking the whole thing out here. There is some newish growth, but it's not as root bound as I was expecting. This is just purely in moss. There's another reason why I'm kind of excited to cut it apart, because I want to experiment with other growing mediums for this one, other light levels, because I know that it is very, very visible with this archipelago that the light, just trying to tease this out of the moss, the leaves that are closer to the grow light definitely go a lot whiter. Okay, this is going okay. Right, so there we go, that's a little bit, like you can see these are quite minty. And what we have left here is like the base of the plant up to that new growth point. So that's looking good. I'm just gonna stick this in here, although like I said, I will make a better moss pole at some point. So yeah, that's the base of the plant. We can go to the side, get rid of all this moss if possible because it's in the way, and let's have a look at how many nodes we have here. So that's 1, 2 little nodes. Third, this is actually gonna be 2 nodes here. It's this feels so weird. Yeah, so that's 2 little nodes, which I will be rooting in, I guess, moss. I think probably it seems to like that the best for now. Yeah, here, just, again, this one is very, very white. Hopefully, I'm really, really hoping that once I pop them up separately and move them into maybe a little bit lower light, that the mintiness sort of comes through. So this is the top part that I cut off. It's a little bit of a chunkier stem because it's a bit higher, but it's also extremely white. And this is the top cutting, so that we've got some sort of Aurea aerial roots happening there. I anticipate this being like a bit of a disaster. Let's go through again. I can't remember how many I took. So, the top. So we've got 15 node cuttings. One of them has 2 nodes, and then we've got this top cutting. So that's like 16 to try and root, and then the base part of the plant, which I will leave as is for now. Yeah, I want to try and get these leaves really big, so hopefully some of that kind of green centre veining comes back to it. If it doesn't, then I'll pick one of these, the one that grows the best, I guess, and try and get some mature leaves on that, because I think it would be really cool with these sort of more ghosty leaves to get something really, really big. But it definitely seems to mature a lot less quickly because there's less chlorophyll than my Aurea, my yellow variegated one, for example. So yeah, that is literally it for today. I wanted to cut these up, and I just thought it would be maybe interesting to watch. So there are the Adansonii, and then obviously we have the yellow variegated Monstera, and that is basically it. So thank you so much for watching. Sorry it was a little bit all over the place, literally just me not really talking about anything interesting and cutting stuff up, but hopefully you enjoyed. If you want to see more like this, please subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon, give this video a like if you want to. And if you want to check out updates on all of these plants and on my other ones, check out my Instagram @slugplants. I post there pretty regularly, and I will see you very soon. Thank you so much. Goodbye.